Welcome back to another episode of
What you say? Oh, that you only meant when
Jason Derulo.
What you say?
What does George say to your viewer questions? All right, just messing around. This is the I think it's like the fourth episode, maybe the fifth episode of answering your questions. And so this has been a goal for 2025. If you could like and subscribe to this podcast on YouTube, but also share your questions. And everyone, if I'm answering your question, I actually will send you a book, sign a book and send it your way. You can comment down below, but there's also a link to a Google form. You can do both. You can do one or the other. And I'm trying to answer as many questions as possible. The benefit of commenting on YouTube is you're not relegated to my answers only. You can get the answers from the community, and hopefully other people will kind of jump in, because I'm just sharing some ideas, some opinions, some perspectives that I have. And I always see it as like, I'm just a guy sharing some learning. So, you know, there's so many people that really understand this stuff in a totally different way, have different experiences than me, who can share some really great ideas. And the question I'm going to focus on for today's podcast is from Chris, who is a new site principal. Chris, shout out to you for being here. Haven't done that in a while. So I wanted to answer Chris's question, and it's going to be like maybe an answer you're not typically used to hearing in this. And I think I think a lot of times we kind of just hear the same thing over and over in education, and we got to kind of like, you know, sometimes when we are constantly going left, maybe we got to go right, maybe change the direction. So Chris's question as a new site principal, Chris says, how do you discover your why? And what are ways to help articulate your why in order to help create a vision, direction for your school? So I see those as two separate questions, one more personal level and one more an organizational level. So I'm going to kind of give you some insights on both. But as Chris is a new principal thinking about that vision, one of the things that I am really passionate about is that if you are new to a school, and I get asked this question all the time, what's the first thing you would change? My answer is always the same. Nothing. I would change nothing. The goal of you're coming into a new organization is to really kind of understand the people you serve, what are their strengths. And I give this very specific example of doing something very meticulous. I would actually create a spreadsheet, and I put everybody's name on the spreadsheet that's in the organization, and then I would write their strength. And so the reason I do that is so I understand what their people's strengths are in the organization already. And then I make sure that not only do I know their strength, but they know I know their strength. And the reasoning behind this is that if people come or people believe that you're coming into the organization to fix them, they're going to fight you all the time. But if they feel valued, they'll be with you on any changes that are happening. So I think that's a really important aspect that, you know, in Chris's role. So coming back to this question of like, you know, articulating your why and really kind of understanding it from yourself, I want to share a little story or a little insight from something outside of education. And I wrote about this in an article you can see down below. And the title of the article is, When You Ask People Their Why, Will You Be Comfortable with Their Answer? And the analogy I'm going to use is, huge basketball fan. One of my favorite players right now is Nikola Jokic. He's won the MVP in the league, I think 3 times now. And he's an amazing player. He's a generational talent, absolutely amazing. And what is really fascinating about him, I've never seen someone so good at basketball who seems so disinterested in playing. Like he won the championship with the Denver Nuggets, and he did not even want to do the parade. He just wanted to get back home. He has horses, and he's fascinating. He seems really interested in everything but basketball, but he's just so really talented. And I think the reason I bring this up is his why might not be basketball. He's just really good at it. He's just really good at basketball. Do you care if his why? Like, do you think any NBA team, this is an MVP, he's a proven winner, do you think they care about his why, what drives him? He's amazing. And I think, does that actually fall over into education? And I wrote this in the post. I said, if I were hiring someone to work in a school today, the non-negotiable for me wouldn't be why you are involved in education. It'd be how good you are at your job. For example, if you're the best teacher in the world, but we're more interested in pickleball on the weekends, I would still hire you. On an opposite note, I don't think I would if you're not a great teacher, but we're passionate about education. So if, thinking about this, if you're really passionate about education, but you're not a very good teacher, your why might be awesome, but your how and what aren't so great. And so thinking back to the time in education when school was everything to me, I remember being really frustrated with a staff member who didn't seem to have the same commitment to the work that I did. My mentor, Kelly Wilkins, said something to me that always resonated. She looked at me and said, "George, not everyone is you." That really hit me when she said that. As her way of saying that my passion at the time wasn't necessarily the passion and drive of others. I got it then, but I really understand it now. And so really kind of think about like when we say things like, "Oh, remember your why," it's kind of like a guilt trip. Like if you're not as invested, with your heart, then, you can't really be, no, there's people that are really, really great at this, really, really great at this. And they also have a lot of other interests. So I think that's a really more important is if you're really good at teaching, but your why might not be on teaching. Maybe teaching is a way for you to pay your bills, but you're really good at it. Do we really care about their why? I think that's something to kind of think about. Like if you hate kids, that's a totally different thing if you're a teacher, but your why, I don't know if that's as important as, we kind of this. And by the way, I'm saying this as someone who was really into that idea of your why, and Simon Sinek, and, probably said this. And, I kind of try to take a step back and ask myself, does this really, really matter? So going back to Chris's questions, as I said, I'm going to split them into two parts. The first one, and again, I'm always interpreting these questions based on just reading them in text. It's not a back and forth conversation because Chris isn't here. So I see this, how do you discover your why? So I'm looking at this for Chris's perspective on a very personal level. And so the thing that I wrote down for this is really to kind of understand, not necessarily my why, but what really drove me is doing things like this, is podcasting. The biggest one for me is blogging. Blogging made such a difference. I know people don't blog anymore, and most people that blog don't actually write their own stuff. I actually write my own stuff because, the purpose of the blog is to make me smarter, not just to create content. It's to actually really kind of understand perspectives, including my own and that of others. And I know it's kind of like, well, people don't read blogs anymore. For me, it's always about actually kind of discovering myself. And I look at writing a blog into two different spaces when I write. One is a space where I am writing to share my learning. And then the second one is I'm writing to learn. Like I'm actually trying to put onto the screen, onto paper, for lack of a better term, my thinking, so I can really kind of work through this process. And I looked at, when I first started blogging about 2009, I've been doing it, I guess 16 plus years. It's got almost 20 years. It's crazy. So one of the things I noticed was what was I constantly writing about? What was I really excited about? And I kept coming back to this conversation about innovation education. That was something that really, really mattered to me. And I don't think I really would have discovered that unless I consistently write it. And I started noticing, like, I am just writing this over and over again. This is actually something that really, really matters to me. And when I wrote Innovator's Mindset, it was an easier process because I had written so much about it over time, and I actually could just pull, blog posts that I had already written and just kind of, put them in a space where I can, it's like I was doing research constantly, and I didn't even know I was doing research, but it's just something that came back to me. And a lot of people ask me about writing a book, and one of the first things I'll say to them, are you writing a book because you want to write a book, or are you writing a book because you are really passionate about what you want to say? Some people just want a checklist, like I wrote a book. And for me, that kind of will fall flat because you're just writing a book to put something out there, as opposed to like, I am very driven by this. I'm very passionate, and people can feel that in the conversation. So I think having a space where you do reflection, whether it's a public space, like a blog, a podcast, can really kind of help you learn more about yourself, or even just writing, doing some reflection, doing some journaling. That is something that you can do to kind of think about this. Take time to yourself to reflect. A big thing I believe is that if you really want to move forward, you have to look back. You have to look back at what you're doing, and that will help you to grow. So the second part of this question, and I'll come back to this, is what are ways to help articulate your why in order to help create a vision direction for your school? And again, I'm interpreting this based on the text that I'm seeing. So when I was reading Chris's question, I wrote about this in What Makes a Great Principal with Allison Apsey and 15 amazing contributors, is when you're thinking about the vision for the school, a lot of people come into an organization and they have a vision of what the school wants to achieve. And they start with that first. And Allison and I were very intentional that we actually listed the vision as one of the pillars of what makes great principals as the last thing that you do. And the reason that I would say it's the last thing you do is because, you know, if you come in with your vision, who's buying into it, right? But vision is something you create with people, not for people. That is a huge shift in thinking, because first of all, going back to the notion of what are the strengths of the people you serve, that's something that we have to be able to understand. But also, we talked about being a resource maximizer. You can actually check out the link to What Makes a Great Principal. I promise you, it's an amazing book. And not because I wrote a big chunk of it, but because I have so many great people contributing to it. It is an awesome book. I'm very, very proud of it. Is you don't know the resources that you have access to. This idea of being a resource maximizer is like, what do you have access to? Like, you know, what's your budget? What already exists in that school? Figuring out those things are actually really, really important. And when you create that vision for your school, when you're doing it together as a community, people are more likely to want to achieve that vision. But if you come in there and you tell people your vision and you want people to achieve it, it doesn't necessarily actually, help in that sense. The important part of a vision is, do I have ownership over it? If I help create it, I also want to help achieve it. If it's created by you, who cares? Like, maybe I'm not as interested in this too. And that is a really important concept. How do we actually create a space where we learn from people and create a vision together? Because if we create it together, we're more likely to want to achieve it. And so the last note I wrote to Chris's question is, this kind of is bringing all of this stuff together. One of the things that educators really, really hate, and I understand this, is remember your why. Remember your why, right? And it's like a thing we just say. Like, it's just, we say it all the time. And it is often used as a guilt trip. Like, hey, I want you to do this really crappy thing. And while you hate it, remember your why. Remember why you're doing this thing that you absolutely despise. And so I get wanting people that are really passionate about education, who really, truly want to make a difference, right? I understand that. And that's why people use this. I don't think anyone's intentionally trying to guilt people. But it's kind of comes off that way, even whether it's intended or not. But then what we do often is we tell people to remember their why, and then we get in the way of it in so many ways. We just get them to hate the job. We just constantly bombard people with continuous work. And if you think about the decade you started in education, it doesn't actually really matter what decade you started. The time frame of the school day is almost the same, right? Whether it's 8:30 to 3, 9 to 3:30, 8 to 2:30, I don't know, right? It's going to be about the same. But the demands on educators is going up and up and up, especially teachers. And we're just constantly asking people to remember their why, but then getting in the way of it and removing the barriers. And one of the things I saw really important as a principal and being a district level administrator was my job was to filter as much away from my staff so they can focus on teaching as much as possible, right? When you teach, you don't just teach, you grade, and that's after school. There's all this other stuff. And then we're going to bombard with surveys and blah, blah, blah. And one of the things I was really frustrated with at the school district level was oftentimes I would see people in that role who would just give people stuff to justify their job, right? I'm going to give you a bunch of things to kind of justify what I'm doing. The way that I saw the role, my job is to take as much stuff off of your plate as possible so you can be the best at your job. And I'll tell you that if you can remove some of those barriers, people will become more passionate about education. But if you wear them down constantly, don't ask them to remember their why, right? Maybe your why is get stuff off of people's plates. That's something is really important to me, is this conversation about why, can be kind of a guilt trip, can, kind of cause people burnout, right? When you say like, hey, we have to do everything we can, everything possible, and like every day we could do this for our kids. the reality of it is that leads to burnout for many people when we don't actually are really thoughtful about removing these barriers. Sometimes we just need a break. Sometimes we need to step away from a classroom. Sometimes, I shouldn't just say sometimes, oftentimes we need to have a life outside of school, right? If your whole life is about being a teacher, what happens when you don't do that anymore, right? What happens when you have a weekend? I think that's something that we have to think about. Not everyone's driven by the same thing. The measure should be, how good are you at what you do? Not why you do what you do, but how good are you at what you do? That's the people you want really to surround and bring into your school. So maybe a little different thought on this topic, because I think a lot of times people are, like I said, the guilt trip of remember your why. Remembering your why and a vision are two different things, by the way. A vision is something we can articulate together. If you help create that, no matter what your drive is education, if you help create that, you see as yourself as something that's a bigger purpose in the school. And that's something I want to attain with my team. So just some thoughts on that. Chris, thanks so much for the question. A book will be coming your way. I'll actually send you What Makes a Group Principal, because I know this is new to you. You might have it, but you're getting it anyway. So thank you so much. Again, I would love to read your questions and perhaps answer them on a future episode of this podcast. So thanks again for being here for another episode of
What you say? Oh, that you only meant well.
Jason Derulo. I don't know why I say Jason Derulo. You know Jason Derulo. What does Joe say?
That it's
To
all
your
for
questions.
the best, 'cause it
Have a wonderful day. Take care.